Okay, here's a little something that it's not really a news story, really. It's nothing. This is purely just like commentary kind of stuff. It's just something that's been on my mind that I've been thinking about for quite a while now. And I've been trying to move more into that, where I'm not just covering like articles or headlines I read the day, where I delve in a little more into the things that concern me and that I want to share, that I don't really see talked about. And this is something that has been on my mind for a while now. And this is just so, and that is, could our military-industrial complex actually be a liability in a real war? And it's just like I said, it's just something I've been thinking about because, when I take a look at something like, say, World War II, and the type of military hardware and the strategies, like the techniques and the equipment that were used during World War II on the American side. Or, well, actually, fuck it, all sides. But anyway, when I look at the hardware that the U.S. used, one thing that stands out to me is that really America's weapons weren't always the greatest. Case in point, the Sherman tank. I mean, it did its job, it was somewhat effective, but really by the time it actually was put into action in Europe, it was absolutely outclassed in almost every way by the tanks that were in armor that was put out there by the Germans. However, there's one area where it was superior, and that was production. Because during the war, the U.S. was like an absolute, just like a manufacturing powerhouse, like pretty much the best as far as production numbers. They literally like converted like automobile assembly lines into tank assembly lines. Like they were cranking these things out like they were fucking Cadillacs. All right, you can go watch the video. It's insane. Like just tank, and see, and that's the thing too. Is like the Sherman tanks were not that good. They weren't. But what made them effective wasn't that they were good or that they were all that great versus the Panzers and the Tigers and everything that the Germans had. What made them sort of victorious in those conflicts was that basically for every technologically superior but complex and in some cases practically hand-built tanks that the Germans had, the U.S. could put out like 5 or 6. You blow one up, there's 8 more coming after you. And that was the main thing. That was what allowed them, led them a lot of times to victory. Was just numbers. Like it was the same with bombers. The same like B-17s. You shoot down 10, next day 30 of them, or there'll be 30 of them. And there's just no end to it. And that was, and then, so really in that conflict, America didn't win because of high-tech weaponry. They won because the stuff they had got the job done, and because there was a shitload of it. Even in Japan, you think of, some people will say that, like, okay, well, what about the Manhattan Project? That was absolutely cutting edge at the time, and that is true. But really, when you look into it, the dropping of the atomic bombs, a lot of people like to say, like, oh, well, that's what ended the war. It helped. it definitely helped, but not in the way that I think a lot of people will think. Because by the time those bombs were dropped, it was essentially a tragic, terrible shock and awe campaign. Really. Like, if you look at the other bombing campaigns that are done on Japan, and at that point, American bombers were stationed at bases in the Pacific within range of mainland Japan. They had, and they had practically no anti-aircraft, no fighters fighters and pilots left to resist, and American bombers just ran roughshod over Japan and just bombed everything, just without fail, just every day, to the point that it actually did more damage in both lives and property loss. More damage was inflicted with conventional bombing raids than with the 2 atomic weapons. So those two, they helped end the war, but more in the sense of they were just so huge and so shocking that it got them to surrender. But it was in no way the only way to win. They could have invaded, and it would have potentially cost more lives on the Allied side, but it could be done. There was nothing that was sort of a fluke. Essentially, what I'm saying is that while it did have an effect, it helped end it. It was not the only reason. It was not the only way that it could have been ended. So, and that was the thing. That was the strategy that worked. The last time America was involved in a major war, I said it wasn't high tech. It was by using technology and using weaponry that was advanced enough, but also easy to manufacture, and also, America could just turn out so much more of it than anyone else. And see, and that's where my concern is. Because when you look at today's military, we've got all kinds of technology. We've got weapons that have gone through their entire multiple generations of these weapons that have never even been used. They're completely removed from major warfare. I mean, hell, far as I know, every nuclear submarine that the U.S. has ever built has never fired a torpedo in anger, to my knowledge. Now, there might have been some, say, Tomahawks fired during the Gulf War, possibly from submarines, but a ballistic missile has never been fired in anger. Torpedo, to my knowledge, again, never fired in anger, because we haven't really gone up against anyone with a navy since the invention of the nuclear submarine. So I'm talking back to the friggin' USS Nautilus on. So we have never put, the current crop of weaponry and hardware we have has never been tested in that scenario. Because if you were actually in an all-out shooting war with someone, provided that we didn't just nuke each other, you would have, you're going to have submarines destroyed. You're going to have aircraft carriers sunk. You're going to have destroyers and frigates blown up. You're going to have tanks lost. And that's my thing, is how much, my concern is that, over the last however many years, basically the cost and complexity of our military hardware has basically spiraled out of control. And in addition to being a never-ending, ever-growing money pit, in the event of a major conflict that the U.S. could not afford. I mean, seriously, you got aircraft that cost, $100 million a piece. look at the numbers of stuff like that, like aircraft that were shot down in the last major conflicts. Granted, it's a long time ago. A lot better technology now, but it's a lot more expensive. So, one is the cost. Basically, that was the thing. That is what led us to victory in the past. Was systems or hardware that was good enough to do the job and was easy to produce. And yeah, granted, now we have hardware that's incredibly advanced and very high tech and very effective. But could the government afford to lose 100 Abrams tanks and have to replace them? In addition to that, how long does it take to build one? Could they actually, this is a fairly advanced piece of hardware with high-tech composite armor and computer systems and gyro-stabilized cannons and gas turbine engines. Like, could you crank those things out like Suburbans? I mean, I doubt it. Like, and that's something that concerns me a lot. Like, we've poured all this money into our military. We've developed all of this high-tech hardware that's incredibly effective, but it's incredibly expensive, and it's incredibly complex. So, again, that's my question. Is that, were we to ever actually get into another real war, again, provided we don't just nuke the planet and get it done with, could that be sustainable? It's like our super carriers that America insists on having. Yeah, they're very big, they're very impressive, but could you replace one if it got sent to if it was sunk? Could you replace 5 of them? And how quickly could you replace them? Because if we're actually in a conflict, we need that thing now, not 6 years from now. But seriously, like I said, you look back, and that was what won World War II, at least. Pretty much, was just the sheer numbers that we were able to produce. I feel is like the key factor. Anyway, that's enough on that.